class so that I will have my notes to come back to afterwards if we have to make this available beyond this evening to other people. And so let me just start off by saying with this whole process that what we're dealing with right now is much bigger than the time frame that we have. Some of you know that this goes back to the drafting of the Constitution. And in the Constitution, there was a requirement of a census every 10 years. And the whole idea of the census was that if we know how many people we have in the country, since we are going to fix the size of the Congress, and that's going to be fixed at 435, what we ultimately came up with, and the Senate is going to be fixed at 100. Now, the idea is that every state will have two senators. So in that context, every state has equal proportional representation in Congress. That is very important because Article 1 of the Constitution gives the legislative power to the Congress, and the Congress is the body that makes the laws that will determine how monies are to be allocated. And that is done in a two scenario setting. Part of it comes through authorization, which is authorizing funds for particular programs. And then the second piece of that is the appropriations, determining how much money goes to a particular program. And the second component is a driving factor in the whole census, because the census is what's used to determine how much money each state gets as its fair proportional share of whatever resources the federal government has as a result of taxes that are collected. All right. And so what they do is they look at your congressional districts, and they look at the number of people that are in congressional districts, and then they make some allocations based on those numbers. All right. So let us take, for instance, in California, there are roughly 761,000 people in each congressional district. All right. And when we look at the come down the food chain to the state assembly, well, in the Senate, there are about 988,000 people in a senatorial district. But then when you subdivide that further into the assembly districts, which we have throughout the state, and the last one is here in San Diego, then we have about 494,000 people per assembly district. And so these numbers get to be important. And what has happened historically is that the legislatures used to appoint, and still do probably in many states, a group of people who then sit down and decide how land is going to be divided and how the numbers are going to run. And so what's happened is that when they start drawing these boundaries, many times the boundaries are drawn so as to strengthen some groups and weaken other groups. So if you take a place like here in San Diego, for instance, where you have Barrio Logan in District 8, shall we say, and then you have a heavy Asian population in say Mira Mesa going north, then you have La Jolla, and La Jolla is going to want to be very closely connected to places like Coronado, if you will, or Solano Beach, and it's going to want to stay in the northern part of the city because the people there are like-minded in terms of income, in terms of wealth, and all of those things get to be important because there's some requirements that go with the census. And I don't want to get ahead of myself here. So what we have happening is the census is to take a count, and the count is to be an exact count of the number of people in a household. It does not concern itself with whether they are legal or illegal. It just wants to have a count. And you know, the concept of a census is as old as the Bible. where I would believe it was King David that did the first census in the Bible in terms of knowing the number of people that were in Israel, and we had the tribes and the numbers within the tribes. So here, the idea is that in a representative democracy, um, if we count the number of people and we allocate the resources based on the number, then we're doing a fair distribution of what we have. Obviously, different people have a different concept of what's fair. I don't know if you ever read the story Animal Farm. It was a satire, and on an Animal Farm, the uh, the idea was that all of the animals were equal, and that they should all have a voice in the things that take place. And so what happened was the pigs began to exert a greater influence out of greed than the other animals on the farm. And in response to people complaining, the pigs wrote this inscription on the farm, on the barn wall, the barnyard wall. It said, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And so we have some people who follow that concept, because when we start counting people, and we have been a victim in terms of our Black communities of households that weren't accurately counted. We just saw the former president who wanted to dilute the process by adding additional questions and trying to make the census a component of tracking people who were legal or illegal. And the whole idea that if you started tracking the folks that are at the bottom end of the totem pole, they're going to avoid being counted. And if you don't count them, then you have a greater pot of money to give to the people who do want to be counted. And so this whole thing about the numbers then playing out every 10 years. And when the numbers play out, then the Census Bureau goes through this data and it makes a lot of determinations on growth, determinations on movement and residency. So what happened in the state of California with the last census is that we lost, according to the count, 180,000 people, which meant that we had to give up a congressional seat. Now, when I first started mentioning congressional seats, I said there were 435 in the House and there were 100 seats in the Senate. I don't care if the state is as small as Nevada or Idaho or Utah, when it's not as big as Texas or New York or California. Each state still gets 2 senators. And the way that works in the Senate is that the Senate seats are for a 6-year term, the congressional seats are for a 2-year term. And what happens with the 6-year term is that a third of the Senate gets up for election each time, so that you never have the whole Senate going out of office at one time. And the Senate is supposed to be the stabilizing factor. If you really want to look at an example, looking across the pond to Europe, it's like having the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Commons is made up of the working people who have shorter terms. The House of Lords made up of the wealth or nobility or the upper class, if you will. In our case, for a long time, the Republican Party took that image on because of its conservative stance. If we really go back and as we look at this scenario, we see then that the people who had wealth, starting with the founding fathers, when they were making laws, they were not concerned about poor or underprivileged people. They were concerned about people who own property. As you know, Black folks then were not even counted as a whole person in terms of the count that was made for us. And so we didn't figure into the census. We didn't really come into play until we got to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, which established citizenship. For instance, in the 14th Amendment not only identified people as having a right to vote, but the 14th Amendment also established the concept of an artificial person, saying that a corporation could be a person. And so we've seen some of the result of that in recent years with Supreme Court decisions that allowed these political action committees to go without identifying themselves and to contribute money to campaigns because the Constitution had found them long ago to be persons. And so, since they were persons, then they were given all of the rights and privileges of persons except the right to vote, the right to raise and spend money, and to implement money. And so, as I talk to you about this process, I want to come on down because I have to stay with the House of Representatives as I move toward the states for you to fully understand what we're dealing with in California and what is happening to us across the nation. What is happening across the nation is that the momentum that Trump started, the momentum of hatred and exclusion and separation and all those things that were generated by the politics of his office being spilled over into a number of areas. We see, for instance, the big lie, the refusal to accept the results of the presidential election and to continue to say that the election was stolen. We also see, looking at January 6th and looking at the select committee investigating it, that we came close to losing our democracy as we know it, because in addition to being angry over the way people voted, there was also a plan to nullify and stop the certification, which is necessary under the Constitution with the Electoral College. The certification becomes necessary to officially make the president a candidate. Remember that the president is not elected by popular vote, but the president is elected by the vote coming out of the Electoral College. And the Electoral College vote is connected to the number of people in the state, the congressional delegations that state have, and the votes that come as a result of how the vote goes in each state in terms of winning those electoral votes. So you notice when we have election night, you will see a person getting so many votes and they get so many electoral votes at the same time. And so the states that have been the big prize for this have been California, Texas, and New York in terms of large numbers. But other states have set things up in ways that a winner can take all, which gets to be important, or a person who gets a portion can take some. And all of this goes back to not only determining the president, but determining those 435 people. So now let's look at something about the 435. As I said, the numbers don't change in the Congress, but the people that the numbers go to change. And so what happens is, if you look very, very closely at the numbers not changing, you will see, for instance, in the state of Texas, that they, because of people moving, they are gaining, I believe it is either one or two congressional seats. And so that means that that seat that was in California, that I believe was the seat that it might have been the seat of Congresswoman Waters, Maxine Waters. It was one or two seats that we had, because Maxine's seat and Karen Bass's seat had always been seats that we had in our community, and one of those seats was created back in the 50s when Congressman Augustus Hawkins was in the state assembly, and he was in line to become the first Black speaker of the California legislature. And in those days, Unruh and the people in charge, the state was not ready for a Black speaker, which we later got with Willie Brown. And then we had to create term limits to get him out of office. And so what happened was, in those days, because people love Hawkins so, they just said, well, we're not ready for a Black to be speaker, but we're going to send you to Congress. So they went into LA and they created the district that's Watts that he represented for over 30 some years. I forget exactly the number, because Hawkins was, I think he might have been close to 20 years in the California legislature, and he lived to be 100. And he was responsible for bringing me to California when I first worked for the Education and Labor Committee in the Congress. And so they created the district that he represented in Watts. And because Hawkins looks like he was white, his family was from Shreveport, Louisiana. They never put his picture on anything. They just put his name up there and he got elected year after year. Okay. And so we've had other people serve, Maxine Waters. We've had Karen that's now there, and she's leaving Congress and running for mayor of LA. And so what they did in this redistricting this time, this group that's called the Citizens Redistricting Commission in California, which was created by the Voters First Act under Proposition 11 back in 2008. This whole group was to bring some integrity to the idea of how we redistrict based on the census. And so what happened before then was we had a situation where um, a group of little old white guys chewing on cigars and drinking up in Sacramento would get in the back room of Fats restaurant, and they get on the tablecloth and they would draw the districts. And what they would do is they would draw the districts so that it favored their people. Let me give you an example here in San Diego that will kind of help you visualize what I'm talking about. The Board of Supervisors in the last census did something very interesting. You had the Assemblywoman from East County who represents El Cajon, Descanso, Alpine, Desur, I mean, just all the rural areas of the county. Well, what they did in this last time around was they took Lemon Grove and Spring Valley and they put those in her district. Now, that meant then that you had communities with color in them, but you put them in a relationship where, in terms of elected office, they could never expect to win an election because no matter who ran, there were always enough white people out there in all these other rural areas to come together and keep that from happening. That was Diane Jacobs was the supervisor who retired, and Joel Anderson took her place in that big runoff race. And so what we had then is a situation where the seat would move, but it stayed in its place in Congress, but it would go someplace else. So the seat that we lost, which was also drawn up by this group in such a way that it would take what had been two black congressional districts uh, held by black people for time immemorial almost, and try to consolidate them into one district so that if Karen had not been running for mayor, she and Maxine, under this new plan that they were drawing, would have to compete against each other for one seat when before they had two seats. The same thing was done in the state of Texas. In Texas, we have two black members who held seats forever, Al Green and Sheila Jackson Lee. Okay. And what they did down there is the same thing. They drew the lines in such a way that the two theoretically would have to compete for each other and black people would lose a seat. Okay. And so we understood that that was not acceptable. In this case, we had the hub group, the blacks who had come together, and some of these people. If you get our paper this week, we have some folks mentioned in here that really did outstanding jobs, like Kelly Todd Griffin, a resident of Los Angeles County, Corey Jackson involved. They were part of what's called the Black Hub, and we had reference to the hub yesterday and last night as Sister Layla Aziz spoke, because they got connected statewide and they started participating in the battle not to eliminate Black representation. And so, why is this important? First of all, remember what I said. Congress, under Article 1, does what? It makes the laws, all right? And in making the laws, it also determines where the money goes. And so, if the district is drawn in such a way that the people elected are not representative, then the making of the laws are not going to embrace the interests of the people who aren't represented, correct? And so we have a problem there. And so we see that this has been a plan. If you look at the fact that so far 22 states since the last election have written and enacted voter suppression laws, which will keep down the number of people of color who are able to vote, who have eliminated voting sites and stands and times and the whole bit, that have crippled the postal system and fought to block any ballots being done by mail. All of this is based on an idea that the Republicans have, that they think and plan long range, that conservative element, and they believe that the masses do not have the staying power to hang in there. So the Republicans and this conservative right, which feels that they have a right to the entire pie without sharing any of it, then that element comes together with the idea that they're going to vote no matter what. These are the people who did not care about Donald Trump's reputation, grabbing women by the genitals, uh, sleeping with the porn star. They didn't care. Whatever he did, he could have done it on national television as long as he hung around long enough to do what? Appoint 3 judges to the Supreme Court, which will change the way the court will rule. And how does it affect this discussion we're having? Because remember, we had the Voting Rights Act created in 1965, along with the Civil Rights Act. And then in 2013, we had Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act nullified by the Supreme Court, which later, recently, further weakened it. Now, what did this section do? In order to fight what was going on in the South, where Black people were being intimidated, boundaries were being drawn so as to exclude them and weaken their numbers so that you didn't have as many Black people in the district. And that process was called gerrymandering, came out of Massachusetts. And the gerrymandering process says that we're going to draw a line in such a way. Remember what I gave you about East County? We're going to draw the line so that we put more white people in and we put a fewer people of color. And so here's where the problem gets to be interesting, because the census carries with it a requirement that there is an inclusion of what they call COIs, communities of interest. And communities of interest are like-minded people who look alike, share cultural relationship, and they should be able to vote in such a way that they have an opportunity to create and implement representative democracy. And so that is the plan, to weaken the ability for people to come together like that, so that no matter how much hell is raised and how many signs and placards, at the end of the day, the vote is going to be fixed. Now, these 22 states that I've talked about, and I hope that you're bearing with me. If there's a question as I'm going, just put up your hand on the sign there, because I don't want this to just knock you out the ballpark. And there's a lot of information, and I don't want to get so engrossed in it that I don't answer any questions that might come up. I'm trying to keep it connected so that as I come back to the state, you will see how what we're experiencing here is a part of a greater scenario, and how the implications when I finish are even greater than we can begin to imagine. And so part of the idea with this voter suppression is not to let people be able to vote. We saw a frustration occur in Georgia, where the people who organized Stacey Abrams and their group in such a way that for the first time in history, they sent a Black man and a Jew to the Senate. This just scared the hell out of people who were trying to cut these numbers down. And those two people getting elected did what? They changed the balance of power in the Senate, which had been Republican. And so Trump had control of the Senate under Mitch McConnell and the White House and the Justice Department. And so the Justice Department then, under Trump's tutelage, was not looking at the drawing of a boundaries, or concerned about examining districts, because the districts that were drawn under the census and the redistricting, they had to be sent to the Justice Department to be reviewed, to make sure that there was a fairness and an equity in the way they were drawn. When the Supreme Court in 2013 nullified Section 5, it knocked that provision out. So now states are able to draw their boundaries any way they want and implement them if they can get the power within the state to do so. And the only hope that we have is that this Justice Department, uh, under the present Attorney General, as it's doing in Texas with the abortion issue, as it's moving on in a couple of other states, will step up and file the kinds of briefs and challenges that will hopefully have a chance of prevailing. But remember, at the same time, all of these things can end up before the Supreme Court as the third arm of our balance of power. Remember, we have checks and balances. Article 1 creates the legislative body, which is the Congress. Article 2 creates the executive, which is the president. And then Article 3 creates the judicial, which is the Supreme Court. And so the way this system works is that Congress can pass a law, the House and the Senate both have to agree. If they pass a law and they have differences, they have what they call a conference. And the conference is made up of the managers of both houses. They come together, map out their differences, and what they complete is called a conference report. And the conference report, in turn, then, when both parties embrace it, is sent to the president. He signs it, and it becomes public law. If he seeks to veto it, normally, because the two parties, the two houses have come together, they usually can muster enough votes to override his veto. And understanding that that can happen has been an incentive for him not to just pick up the pen. So what's the next step? Once the thing is enacted into law, and I'm taking you down a path, but it comes right back to the census, so bear with me. When it's enacted into law, lawsuits are filed, it goes before the Supreme Court. If the Supreme Court strikes the law down in terms of what's happening, then the implementation is over. And if Congress wants to reverse what the Supreme Court did, it has to go back and then legislate a new provision. We saw this happen very clearly with the whole concept of the burning of the flag, because the flag is considered sacred, and we had people burning the flag, and then we had people rising up against the flag burning, and then we had the court move against flag burning, and then we had the Congress come back and say that as repulsive as burning the flag is, it is still a freedom of expression under the First Amendment, and therefore is legal, though it's offensive. And so now we have people in Congress who are elected from districts that have been what? Gerrymandered. They have been drawn in such a way as to dilute the vote of the people who might want to benefit most. Let's look at LA as an example. In LA, the way they were drawing the boundaries there, they were canceling out not only a congressional district, but the impact was going to be felt beyond that. Because remember, we have uh, a situation where in California, we're told that blacks are fleeing the states. But the reality is that in California, blacks make up 5% of the state, okay? And then we had a discussion today, and that 5% represents about 40 million people that are here, who live in 52 congressional districts, 80 assembly districts, and 40 state senatorial districts, okay? And so that gets to be important, understanding how the numbers work here in terms of the state. Now, the day when we were doing our redistricting Zoom call and we were talking about it, one of the people on the line who's a part of the hub said that, in effect, the population for blacks in California has gone up 3% and not down. What's happened in California is that people have moved, say, from Oakland or the Bay Area, and they have come south. And so they've come south, the weather is different, the climate, and so that represents a change, but it does not represent a leaving of the state. And even though people have left the state, what we're looking at, and we have to look at, is how many black people are in the state, how many black people are in these various districts. Now, why is this important? One lady pointed out earlier today, and I think it was Sister Kelly Todd from the Carson area, how um, in her lifetime she had moved a number of times in the state, and a lot of people used to move in the state because they were trying to find good schools, quote unquote, in which to place their kids. And some of us are old enough to remember that busing became a key element. Here in San Diego, it was under the Collins decision that busing was implemented. And we know that we saw kids from Lincoln being bused to La Jolla. And so some people thought that was a great thing, that our kids from the inner city were going to get a better education, while the schools on this end were not up to par, because we know that before Brown versus Board of Education, um, a lot of the schools were inferior. The textbooks were inferior. Many of them remained inferior for a very long time, even after that. And what Black parents understood that if I put the salt and the pepper in the same shaker, then you can't throw the pepper out without throwing the salt out. And so we begin to have these busing decisions where we were moving kids. A great deal took place on the East Coast, Charlotte v. Mecklenburg school districts, Boston, where we used to think of it as being the cradle of democracy. And all of a sudden, when busing came up, they showed their true racism. They sent people to Congress like this lady, Louise Day Hicks, who came raising hell and rode into Congress on being against busing. And you will notice that in the past week, in Boston, for the first time in its history, it's elected a Latino woman to be mayor. But what's also missing is there were five African American women running, and one had been president of the city council. And when the vacancy occurred with the mayor stepping down to take an appointment, she became the acting mayor. And we know that the Irish can be very conservative. And maybe at some point we're going to find out why, for instance, those five Black folks didn't get together and agree on which one was going to run so they could have had a chance at winning. I'm talking about drawing boundaries in redistricting that have long range effect, that determine down the road uh, what is the school district going to look like. Here in San Diego, for instance, we have a situation where when we have the next school board election for the first time, board members will be elected by districts that have to be drawn. And we discussed yesterday or 2 days ago on Black Men United, when Black Men and Women United, how that remember what I said, how redistricting has to take place, and it takes place at the state level, it takes place at the congressional, at the state, at the county, at the city, at the school board district level. And in most instances, in other places, school boards were, their districts were drawn separately from city council districts because they didn't want the city council, the school board, to become a stepping stone to challenging the city council members. All right. And so now we have a situation where we already, for the first time, are facing electing school board members by district. Remember, at first we had an initial race, and then we had a general election uh, in November, and everybody gets to vote on the people from all the districts. And so you could win District E, but La Jolla could put you out by voting for somebody else that they wanted. Now, that's gone out the window with the district election. But here's what's happened. Uh, we're looking at a situation where it appears that a committee has been formed to draw up the new school board boundaries, but it has not been widely publicized or advertised. A matter of fact, I think they're getting ready to do something with the Voice and Viewpoint for the first time on this area. So what happens if the public does not understand the whole concept of notice and due process, which means that we can't make laws without giving you an opportunity to know what they are and to comment on them and to respond to them. If you don't get that opportunity, then you're not going to be participating. And as one person said today in our session, and we hear it often, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And unfortunately, we're on the menu more times than we should be. And so now we have this situation in California with emerging deadlines where maps have been drawn. And I encourage you to get a copy of this week's Voice and Viewpoint, because if you get the paper on page 14 of section 1, there's an ad that says you can help draw maps that represent all Californians. And then there's a QR code down there, and there's a website. And the website they ask you to visit is called drawthelinescalifornia.org. Drawthelinescalifornia.org. That's very important that that site is there. And then since the commission is getting ready to hold these hearings, the commission also has an email address that you can send your comments to. And that email address is called uh, Voters First Act at crc.ca.gov. Okay. And so again, it's the email address is Voters First Act at crc.ca.gov. Now, why is this so important? Um, the blacks in California, we might be few in number, but if we're not careful, boundaries are being drawn in such a way to further dilute us. And why is that happening? We already know that the browning of California and the browning of America is taking place. And in effect, if you look at California and you put together Asian, Latina, and Black, then whites become the minority in the state. The whites that then are becoming an are the minority, they still control a great deal or trying to hold on to wealth and influence. So what do they do in the state? If they draw these lines right, they can restrict who the members are of the state assembly. Now, we know in California that the assembly and the Senate are both Democratic, and we have a Democratic mayor. So here we had, when we just went through this recall effort with the governor, we had elders out there. Larry Elders is crazy as a $3 bill, all kinds of stuff being said. And he jumped ahead of Caitlin and Cox and all of these other people because of what? He was Black in color, but he was committed to the philosophy of let's not get rid of the police, let's have more enforcement. All the right wing rhetoric from the Trump era and from all of the people supporting the 400 and some voter suppression acts in the 50 states around the country, he echoed what they loved, and they rose up to try and support him. Fortunately, the people were aware, and I guess if he had not run and just let Caitlin in and Cox with his bear, and Caitlin trying to decide which way she was going to go, probably people wouldn't have gone to the poll. But when elders got involved and that conservative white rose up to support him and made him the number one likely person behind the 40 some people running against the governor in the recall, it woke up the sleeping giant. And people went to the polls and they voted, and the governor prevailed. But there was still a threat there. And so now we're looking at how this threat is still trying to play out. I've showed you the picture across the nation. Yes, we might be a blue state, but if they can succeed with the gerrymandering, with the drawing this district so that we knock out Black school board members, if we knock out Blacks in the board of supervisors, if we knock out Blacks on city councils because districts are drawn, look at what could happen in San Diego. We could lose an African American representing the fourth district just by people redrawing the lines in such a way that other people become the predominant element in the community. And so it could be very, very serious, if you will. We can have our schools influenced in terms of the board. Charter schools can be affected in terms of the boundaries and the people who control the dollars. Uh, we can be impacted because the 10th Amendment to the Constitution says that all powers not given to the federal government under Article 1 are reserved to the states. And so that gets to be social and wealth, public welfare, and all of those issues. That's why we still have a number of places in the South that were fighting, against the Affordable Care Act, didn't want people to have the benefit. And we know that if it had not been for affordable care, known to the haters as Obamacare, we would have had a lot more people dying in this pandemic who would not have been able to have health care. And so that allocation of money again comes back to who the people are that represent you, how many people are in a given area, and how the formulas from the Census Bureau draws those on those numbers to determine what is a fair and equitable distribution. So that means that more money would go to Texas and to California with now 51 congressional districts, then would go to Idaho or Utah or or some smaller state like West Virginia, and it would make a big difference in terms of allocation. It would make a difference in terms of highways and roads and healthcare and social services. All of these things that are funded. If we look at the various departments under the president's cabinet, you have the Department of Education, money's come out of there. You have Health and Human Services with NIH, funds come through there. We have transportation, and we've already got an issue here in terms of our roads, and we have people there in the legislature trying to pass new acts. Sandag has recommended in the future that there be a tax, a 4-cent tax on each mile that you drive because of the number of electric cars coming on board that are reducing the amount of gas that's being purchased. And there's already a federal excise tax on gas, and the revenue from that will go down because the gasoline driven cars will go down. And so, what we need to do, and I think it was Mr. Corey Jackson this morning who made this observation, a couple of the people that are part of the hub say that not only must we pay attention right now, we need to be in contact. We need to look at where we are. We need to look at who the people are that are representing our interests in terms of this census scenario that's going on. And then we need to make sure that we share our concerns with them. All right. So what do we have? In the city of San Diego, we have a commission on redistricting. In the county of San Diego, we have a commission on redistricting. The county commission is different from the city because the city of San Diego is a charter city. That means it's a sovereign entity, just like the county, and the county is a sovereign entity. And so the county can influence the school districts, say Alpine and other areas, because under the County Board of Education, those other cities and unincorporated areas that are not chartered, like the city of San Diego, and there are 40 school districts and 500,000 students in the county of San Diego itself, they can start drawing boundaries that can determine who gets elected. And so you know that if you go east or you go north, you don't see as many people of color on the Board of Education. Now, why is this important? Because these very same states right now are trying to pass, what is it called? Oh, um, CRT. What is it? The whole
critical race theory.
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much. My mind was freezing on me. Critical race theory. And they have identified books and they've identified information. They've identified what can be taught about slavery, what can be taught about the Civil War. If they had their way, Sister Jones's book on the 619 Project would not be available. The next thing you know, we'll have people burning books. And so if you get the right people on the boards of education, then they can ban the books that people can read. All right. If you get the right people on the board of supervisors, just look at what we had in San Diego. And for years, the board of supervisors was controlled by 3 white Republicans. And so it was very difficult to get something. We had Leon there for District 4, and we had Greg Cox, who was user friendly District 1. Now Cox has been replaced by Nora Vargas, okay, Nate Fletcher has replaced Leon, and then we now have a third member. So we have a Democratic majority, which we never had before, and we have a board of supervisors that each member of that 5-member board has a $1 million discretionary fund given to them out of each budget to determine who and what and how they help people within their districts. And so it's incumbent upon us to know who is elected. Is more incumbent upon us to know who's running for office. And then if we know who's running for office, we can have some say. I want to pause there. There's just so much. It's all in my head. Let me just say that I have been through five census. I've been through, uh, uh, and this would be number six. So I go way back to my days on the Hill. I've been 50 years in this business, and 12 of them working for Congress and other involvements in the other 38. And so I've had a hands-on national touch with what happens with the drawing of census tracts and lines and how these things play out. And I have seen a conscious effort to keep the information like we've been trying to share to a minimum or make it available at the very last minute so that when people hear it, they don't know which way to go or what to do. And by the time they figure it out, the die is already cast. And so we have to get involved. Let me pause here and just open this up. Whatever questions, and I'm not going to hold it to the clock. I will stay here as long as it takes. If you have questions, if it's been helpful, tell me. If you think I've wasted your time, I can handle that too. And I just wanted to try to help us understand beyond just getting a snapshot of what's going on without understanding how it all comes together. The line is open. Anyone? Questions, comment, thought?
Yeah. On the commission there, like here in San Diego, you said there's a city and a county.
Yes.
All right. So once they go through that, the commission, who assigns the people to the commission?
Okay, let me back up. In the city of San Diego, we have 9 members and we have 2 alternates. As I recall, I believe members of the city council were able to designate someone to be a commissioner. And in the case of District 4, if I'm wrong, someone can correct me because it's all running together in my head. One of the alternates came from here. The whole idea is that if the city of San Diego, let's just say for purposes, has a population of 900,000, though the population is closer to like 3 million. So I think that what happens is that there has to be a like number of people in each district. So that means that when someone tries very hard, to um, uh, when someone tries very hard to get the numbers that they want in their own district, you have to look at it. For instance, let's say District 8 and District 9 and District 4. So District 4 wants something that District 8 has, but District 8 has to be able to get something to offset that number, and it has to see if what District 4 wants. In our case, when District 4, we have District 9, which is a bunch of white folks, Redondo and part of North Park and East in the areas of San Diego. And
Yeah.
in the drawing of the boundaries, they did not want to have anything to do with District 4 because they have bought into the myth that if you are associated with this district, then you're going to have your property value go down. And if your property value goes down, then you're going to really be in trouble. Okay. And so
Yeah.
you have all of that kind of craziness going on that people were trying to avoid. Now, remember, even our housing patterns are bad news for us because the housing patterns were drawn in such a way that we had. Remember when we had redlining?
Yeah.
Okay, and the whole concept of redlining was that that we're going to only lend money for home purchases in certain areas, and we're not going to let people buy that don't look like us. We just had a 3-part series being done on what used to be restrictive covenants, and it was set up so as to keep loans and to keep blacks from owning property in certain places. All of these things are still at work. And so what happened in city of San Diego, to give a short answer, the people here Some people here, like Sister Layla Aziz, Barry Pollard, and a few others, they were part of what became known as a unity coalition. And they began to negotiate with each other in terms of communities that they wanted to either reclaim or were ready to give up. And all those kind of things kind of helped them come to some agreement on the kind of boundaries that are being drawn up, even though we still have some people that have ideas about what they want and who they want in and who they don't want in. So I'm trying to stay away from a more micro discussion here because my mind is wired right now to the big picture, and I don't have that file drawer in my head handy. I can tell you though that the county redistricting is different than the city. The county let a contract last January, and as I understand, it looks like it went to the Asian Business Association. And when the county let this contract that went to them, it had the impact of, okay, I want to keep recording, forgive me. I was messing with us. Oh, what was I saying? Ah, I'm sorry, I lost my thought when that happened.
Asians that received some sort of contract from the city.
Oh, yes, that contract went to the Asian Business Association, and they in turn hired people, you know, for the map drawing and the whole thing. Fortunately, people like Sister Aziz, they were able to find some funds, and the hub was able to get some people to help with the demographics of what we wanted to put out here in our area. And so, but the county didn't make a effort to put all of that out. The county went with this contract, and then now at the last minute, all of a sudden, this group and a couple of other entities that got some money are now trying to rush out and have contact with somebody at the community level when it takes more than that to make this work. I see I've been joined by John Stump, who has been one of the fighters on this whole thing of what we've been going through locally. I would like to, if I could, please first, are there questions going to what I've tried to lay out in terms of how the process works? Because that was the primary purpose this evening, not to try to speak for the commissioners of them, but to make sure that we have enough basic understanding that we're comfortable speaking up in terms of what we want to see, and that we understand how we're impacting long range, because we're going to be impacted the next 10 years by the decisions that are being made. Question or comment? Line is open.
Well, John,
Hey, John.
how are you tonight?
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
And I listened to the great presentation on God Radio last night. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And thank you for organizing this. You know, where we're at right now is that the commission has adopted a preliminary map. It doesn't look like they're willing to make any significant changes to it. I talked at their meeting today and said, at least when you, whatever map you decide, randomly assign the council districts. So you put the odds and evens in a fishbowl and draw them out. So why does district 1 always have to be first? Huh?
No,
And
go ahead. Yeah.
District 1 always have to be first. District 9, 8 always have to be last. Okay. And there's, you know, at city council, District 1, La Jolla always gets to speak first.
Yes.
So I'm pushing to get us randomized. The second thing is, and I don't want to discourage anybody, but people have got to know that we're in the position now that the changes they're only going to go for changes on the margins. Okay. And if you're going to make a change, this is my reading of it, but if you're going to propose a change, it's got to be fully thought out. You've got to say, we want to add these block groups, and we're willing to trade for these other block groups to balance it out. District 4, you know, a lot of people have focused on, well, traditionally we've had this area or that area. The real thing is, where is the future for District 4? And I believe the future for District 4 is on the eastern boundary next to La Mesa, Spring Valley, and Lemon Grove, going north to University and Elkhorn Boulevard, where the African-American refugee and immigrant population is, and where the Voice and Viewpoint offices are, and where the African Alliance offices are. So if anybody would like to talk in detail about any changes, I'd like to talk to them about them. Some people have been very concerned about South Crest and Mount Hope. And South Crest and Mount Hope do not protect community of color, the Black community of color, because those areas are 80 to 95% Hispanic. And so what you do is you dilute District 4. And unless this mapping process changes, I think our 50-year history of having a Black council person from District 4 is over.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I've said enough. I'd like to.
Yeah, you did. You were right though, John. And I appreciate your coming on reminding people. And I guess the other question is, because there are some more meetings and I don't have all of the dates in front of me. We will do e-blast from the Voice of Viewpoint as we find out, so that people can have a chance to speak up. We know that Ken Marlborough is the vice chairman of the commission, and I'm not quite sure how vocal he's been on some of these points that we've been most concerned about, because I haven't talked to him. He did participate in one of the Zoom conferences that we had with the county redistricting commission. I believe it was county. Yeah, I might have. I've kind of lost track of them. There's so many going on. But I do want to know, and thank you, John, if there are any of you who are listening have any questions or comments, I want you to feel free to speak up. I don't want you to be intimidated with what we're trying to do here. I did this because when we were on Black Men and Women United on Tuesday, there were several people that said they didn't understand the process and they didn't know what was happening. And so I wanted to help people understand this whole thing as much as possible.
Do have a question.
Yes, Sabine.
What is there a deadline as far as people can bring in some requests of changes as Mr. John just mentioned?
Well, I think the whole thing is supposed to wrap up December 15th. And John, correct me if I'm wrong. I think there's some discussion about trying to get the date extended because the piece that we have, people are really speaking out about how this thing has not been done in a fair manner, incomplete information, late. The outreach hasn't been there as it should be. And so I don't know how that's going to work.
I can express my opinion.
Yeah.
My opinion, having been at or watched every one of the meetings and knowing the chairman very well. Okay. The chairman is Mr. Hebrink, who is simultaneously the chairman of the Redistricting Commission, the Ethics Commission, and the Audit Committee of the City of San Diego. And he just got reappointed by the completely Democratic mayor and council. He's a Republican for another 5 years, okay, to the Ethics Commission. Now, I have watched him. He is a masterful chairman. He is running a railroad, and he not only expects to make the December 15th date, but I believe he is going to terminate the process on the 5th meeting. There will be no extensions. When they have their 5th meeting, that will be it. He will have run the railroad on time. And there is no, besides the next 4 meetings will be the last meetings. And they get to independently decide. It doesn't go to city council, doesn't go anyplace else. It'll be all over with probably about the 5th of December. Did that help, Sabine?
So what we have here though, Sabine, I'm glad you raised the question because this makes a point I was trying to make earlier. We don't pay attention to people who are being appointed to boards and commissions. And if we're not interested in it and we can't see it, we just let it pass. And then these people lay in the cut for such a time as this, when they can activate their influence on behalf of the interests they represent. Remember the interests that they represent, not the interests that they are supposed to represent. And that's where we run into great difficulty. There's no reason that this person should be in those 3 positions and they're holding this position here. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, but have you seen anything from any city council members complaining about it?
Absolutely not. I mean, this is too much power for one man to hold, okay?
That's right.
And he's held it for too long. Now, the Ethics Commission, they have a rule that it's 5 members, 2 Republican, 2 Democrat, and 1 nonpartisan. But there's a lot of Republicans out there, and there's a lot of Democrats, and there's a lot of blue and red Democrats. So we're not paying attention. You're right. And this thing, he's got him cowed at the Redistricting Commission. I mean, I've been a chairman of many things, as you know, Dr. Warren. And this chairman runs this thing like a railroad, and it knows exactly where he wants to go. And it's going to be all over, I'd say December 5th.
Well, so we have to make noise until we reach that point, I think. And John, I appreciate your sharing with us. I just want to ask before we go, because I'm trying to gauge this. Does anyone question, comment, uncertainty, whatever? I was just trying to get a gauge in terms of what we just tried to accomplish. Okay, there's no more to be said then. I thank all of you for tuning in, and I hope it was of some help. If there are questions beyond this, then you're always free to be in touch with me. If I don't have the answer, I'll find it and we'll make it work.
Yeah,
John,
thank you. I
thank you.
appreciate it.
Okay.
I think it was very informative tonight, and I'm really very, very pleased that you took the time to do this. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you too.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Get the paper this week so you can follow up on the pieces that I mentioned. And because you'll find those, the QR, the code down there and those emails, and we can still have some influence in terms of what's happening statewide. Okay, everyone, be blessed. Thank you again.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.